The final look we're going for is for animated text to flow along a path. In this case, I have one mask path at the beginning that's inspired by the movement in the background movie. I'll press End to see the second keyframe for the mask path. I'll bring my starter comp forward again, where I have my text, and at this point the blur is animating along with tracking. Just so we can see things clearly, I'll turn off the eyeballs for both animators. So now we just have some plain text. I'll make sure the text layer is selected. This is very important. You can only apply text on a path if the path is actually on the text layer. The path cannot be on the background layer. But I will turn on the background just so I can be inspired by the movement in the animation. If you don't have the exercise files, see if you can find a similar background with some nice animated shapes. So with the text layer selected, I'll select the pen tool, and then I'll also make sure that the Roto Bezier option is enabled on the right-hand side of the Tools panel. To create the path, I'll simply click anywhere and just flow along these lines. I can return to a point, press the Option key, and adjust its tension. I'll return to the Selection tool and move some of the points around until I get just the line I'm looking for. I prefer to have a nice smooth line with no hard edges. Next, in the timeline, we'll twirl down Path Options and change the Path menu from None to using Mask 1. As soon as I do that, now I'll see the path options. By all means, play with all of these options just to check out what they do. Reverse Path will change the negative positive side of the path. This is very useful for text on a circle, where you might want the text to be inside the circle. We'll change it back the other way. Perpendicular to path changes how the text sits on the path, whether it automatically orients along the path or whether it sits upright in the composition. Now the path does have a start and an end. So when you turn on Force Alignment, it forces the first character to the beginning of the line and the last character to the end of the line. What's actually going on is that the text is justifying between the first margin, which happens to be at the beginning of the path, and the last margin, which happens to be at the end of the path. But in the timeline, you have controls for where the first and last margins are, so you can adjust that. But what we want to do is animate the text along the path, and you won't be able to do that so long as Force Alignment is enabled. So I'll turn off Force Alignment, and I'll set first margin back to 0 for now, and I'll change the last margin back to 0 as well. So with Force Alignment turned off, when I scrub the value for first margin, the text will move along the curve, and the same thing will happen when I scrub last margin. So it's probably best to just pick one or the other. So I'll undo. So in this case, I'm going to animate first margin. So at time 0, I'll turn on the stopwatch for first margin and move the text back towards the beginning of the path. Now at this point, I'll want to enable Animator 2, which adds tracking. That way I'll be able to see what's happening to my title at the beginning of the animation when tracking is set to 10. Now I can adjust the first margin, or I can also adjust the tracking value. I'll go to the end of the comp by pressing End, and I'll scrub the first margin value and place the title where I'd like it to be at the end of the animation. I'll RAM preview, and that's how the text looks moving along a static mask path. Now remember, you can animate the mask path. I'll twirl down masks in the timeline, return to time 0, and mask path is the property I need to animate. So I'll turn on the stopwatch for mask path, and that will remember the position of the mask path at this point in time. I'll press End, I'll click off and then back on so that just one point is selected, and we can choose how we'd like this to look. We'll make a few little changes, maybe something like that. We'll RAM preview, and now the mask is animating as well as the tracking. If you move the current time indicator or press play to do a standard preview, you'll see the mask animating in the comp panel. Now all I need to do is turn back on Animator 1 so I can see my blur effect as well. And of course at this point you can do some tweaking, press U to see all of my keyframes, and I can decide which keyframes I'd like to ease into. I think the tracking amount could do with some ease, so I'll select it and press F9, and you can also choose to ease into the offset keyframe if you like. I'll bring the final comp forward again and point out that I did add a radial shadow effect. And you can find that under Effect, Perspective, Radial Shadow. In the next movie, we'll look at how to animate text in 3D space, and that will use the Enable per Character 3D option, which, by the way, you can add to any animation. So after you do the next chapter, feel free to return to any of the animations you've done so far and see how they look animating in 3D space.